You have wheeled the economy to the nadir of failure. This house must stand strong. We will not approve of any additional borrowing. There must be a debt ceiling in this country.
One of the rating agencies that Ghana government has contracted has downgraded Ghana to restrictive default. We are in a deep hole.
I'm ready to face my problems. I'm ready to fix it. I'm ready to make a U-turn from the irresponsibility of the past.
I do not exaggerate when I say so.
What I know is that when you are in a hole, the first thing you do is to stop digging.
Ghana's economy is in a free fall. The country is seeking a $3 billion bailout from the IMF, but the lender of the last resort isn't making it any easier for the Gold Coast.
I cannot find an example in history when so many malevolent forces have come together at the same time.
The situation is worsening by the ticking of the clock. By the end of 2022, the local currency, the cedi, had depreciated by almost half against the US dollar. Inflation was 50%, and analysts believed the actual inflation could have been more than 90%. Petrol and diesel prices jumped by 88% and 128% respectively. Public transport fares doubled. Food prices went up by 122%, while water and electricity tariffs shifted north by over 20%. It's early 2023, and Ghana's economic crisis is in full throttle, and the country is in a total debt distress.
We are in a crisis. I do not exaggerate when I say so.
But how did a country so endowed with natural resources, a giant in cocoa, gold and oil, end up in this kind of rapid economic turmoil? In 2019, Ghana was having an extraordinary economic performance, with the World Bank describing it as Africa's rising star. In just 2 years, inflation had fallen from 15.4% to 7.9%. Budget deficit was less than 5% from 6.5%. Ghana was the fastest growing economy in the world. We look at the possible errors, miscalculations, misfortunes, and possible recklessness by those at the helm of Africa's 8th largest economy. On his way to the State House, President Nana Akufo made some enticing promises to his voters in 2017. He ascended the helm of the highest office and made some drastic changes that were bold and appealing to the masses, but technically reckless to say the least.
The cost of providing free secondary school education will be cheaper than the cost of the alternative.
The president introduced resource-intensive programs but cut on state revenue shockingly. Worse still, the government never made enough efforts to widen revenue base to meet the president's ambitious strategy. This left one obvious option: borrow your way to a crisis, 80% of the country's GDP to be precise. The government started by scrapping off 15 taxes, which they called nuisance taxes, including VAT on real estate and financial services and VAT on domestic flights. This would definitely reduce the government income, but what the government did next was even more shocking. They spent $2.1 billion on what they called banking sector cleanup, closing 10 banks in the process and terminating licenses for another 340 financial institutions. The government introduced free high school education and went on to reintroduce nurses' allowances at an annual cost of $2.5 million, which the previous government had scrapped off, citing limited cash. In August of 2021, Akufo-Addo and his government began the construction of 111 hospitals with an estimated price tag of more than $1 billion. The president himself would later admit that this project was overly ambitious. Pressure kept mounting on Akufo and his administration to fulfill a plethora of electoral promises, forcing the government into borrowing more and crushing the country into a mountain of public debt.
We will not approve of any additional borrowing. You have wheeled the economy to the nadir of failure when you have borrowed to over close to 100% of GDP. Where does this happen in the world?
The most recent data released by the Bank of Ghana put the country's debt load at 48.9 billion as of September 2022. This would later worsen given that most of Ghana's debt is denoted in dollars and the cedi has been performing badly against it. Ghana spends more than 50% of its revenue on salaries with a reported payroll of 120 ministers and 1,000 presidential staffers, further draining the public purse. A number of non-viable projects also contributed to the predicament, including the NABCO, an apprenticeship program, One Village, One Dam, and One District, One Industry, among others. The country is also reported as having excessive tax exemptions for large corporations. Prudence requires earning before spending. With such ambitious spending, Ghana's revenue mobilization must have been at peak. To the contrary, the country didn't make enough efforts during the period of economic boom, other than relying on issuance of bonds for more debt. This is what Daniel Anim Amate, an economist with Accra-based Policy Initiative for Economic Development, told Al Jazeera in an interview. In quotes, "We could have generated sufficient inflow to be able to meet repayment obligations. Borrowing is not a bad thing, but how you use it is critical. On our part, the managers of the economy failed to invest in the critical sectors of the economy." Majority of consumer products in Ghana are imported from countries like the US, India, the UK, China, among others. This leads to increased demand for the US dollar, further damaging performance of the local currency, the cedi, and consequently leading to an increase in US-denoted debt due to the weakening of the cedi. During the times of economic boom between 2017 and 2019, Ghana must have focused on programs that created value and reduced the country's dependence on imports. Ghana is the second largest producer of cocoa in the world, only beaten to number one spot by Cote d'Ivoire. Agriculture contributes more than 40% of the country's GDP, as is reported on Statista.com. Government programs geared towards promotion of agriculture would have created more jobs, provided food security, and saved the economy against the shocks of currency depreciation through increased exports and dependency on local production. This has worked well for Uganda, for example, where President Yoweri Museveni and his government have been so outspoken on import substitution, being able to attract investors.
Why? Because the raw material base is already big. Like coffee. Coffee, we are producing almost 9 million bags of coffee. And we are earning about $900 million from that. But if you add value, it can bring in 10 billion.
So the president and his government encourage a lot of investors into the country to produce items or products that will always be imported. And this has done so well, promoting the country's local production, improving the country's balance of payment, and a lot of value addition is happening in Uganda. Kudos to the government with their Bubu program.
That if the manufacturer in Uganda, additional to giving them free land, you will ensure that Ugandans will buy their products. It's called Buy Uganda, Build Uganda. I told them that if they go into the furniture sector, all government ministries and departments shall be able to buy their furniture.
A 2022 report by Statista.com shows that Ghana imports goods and services worth over 40% of the GDP. This leaves the country vulnerable to forex fluctuations, putting pressure on the forex reserves. The new government should have focused more on import substitution by promoting local manufacturing and agro-processing for value addition. All programs Mr. Addo focused on were fine, but limited resources as always call for precise prioritization. Just as an example, instead of providing free education, the government could have chosen to subsidize local industries producing consumer goods directly competing with imports. Low taxes can attract investments through reduced operational costs. This would result in low commodity prices. That's a good way to reward voters. However, every government is funded by her people. Before scrapping off any of the so-called nuisance taxes, the government of Ghana should have established alternative sources of revenues to compensate for the gaps created. The president of Ghana also focused a lot on long-term projects like free high school education at the expense of medium-term projects that would probably yield long-term benefits like subsidies for agro-processing. The 2020 brought a significant drop in government revenues and a rise in government expenditure world over due to COVID-19 pandemic, and this resulted in slow economic growth and inflation, with Ghana no exception. 2022 saw Russia invade Ukraine, which would hurt Ghana's agricultural sector due to increased prices of farm inputs, as like any other part in the world. Enter malevolent forces. The president of Ghana solely blames the COVID-19 pandemic and Russia's invasion of Ukraine as the chief cause of Ghana's economic crisis. But this analysts strongly disagree, given numerous reports of mismanagement and enormous corruption within the Ghanaian government.
And it's important that as part of the democratic demands, that the president understands his role and leaves office.
Also questionable is the president's decision to commence a 1 billion project for construction of hospitals in 2021 before the economy could fully recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. This has been looked at as a populist approach and government's reckless spending, which did not look at generating income but rather using borrowed money, protecting the forex reserves within the central bank. We pray for Ghana, and where we can help as Ghanaians, let's help ourselves and Africans at large. This is Dreams of Success. Thank you for watching. My name is Francis. Cheers.